The rain hammered against the windshield of Nora Hayes' ancient Honda Civic as she pulled into the parking lot behind Grind Coffee House. Her shoulders ached from hunching over a computer screen for 12 straight hours. Designing logos for clients who paid peanuts and demanded miracles, the digital clock on her dashboard glowed 11:47 p.m. Another day that had stretched far beyond what any reasonable person would call normal working hours. Nora rubbed her eyes, ignoring the cheap mascara she'd applied that morning in what felt like another lifetime. Her reflection in the rearview mirror showed someone who looked older than her 26 years, with dark circles that no amount of concealer could hide, and hair that had given up any pretense of style hours ago. She'd grabbed exactly 4 hours of sleep the night before, surviving on nothing but black coffee and the desperate hope that her freelance graphic design work might eventually pay enough to cover both rent and groceries in the same month. Cafe's backlot was nearly empty, except for a few employee cars clustered near the building's rear entrance. Nora had been working the closing shift at Grind for 8 months now, a second job that helped bridge the gap between her irregular design income and the relentless march of bills. Rita, the owner, was understanding about her erratic schedule, and didn't mind when Nora brought her laptop to work on client projects during slower evening hours. She shifted the car into reverse, her mind already focused on the warm shower and instant ramen waiting at her studio apartment. The parking lot's lighting was dim, casting long shadows between the vehicles, and the rain created a curtain that made everything beyond 10 feet look like watercolor smudges. Nora checked her mirrors out of habit, saw nothing but empty space, and began backing up. The sound was unmistakable metal meeting, metal with a sickening crunch that seemed to echo off the surrounding buildings despite the rain's attempts to muffle it. Nora's stomach dropped as she slammed on the brakes, her heart immediately racing with the kind of panic that comes from knowing you've just made your already complicated life infinitely worse. She sat frozen for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, hoping against hope that maybe it hadn't been as bad as it sounded. Maybe it was just a minor scrape. Maybe the other car was an old beater like hers, and the owner would understand that accidents happen to people who are too exhausted to see straight slowly. Nora opened her door and stepped into the rain. The cold droplets hit her face like tiny needles, instantly soaking through her thin work shirt. She walked around to assess the damage, and what she saw made her knees go weak. Her car had struck the front end of what could only be described as automotive perfection. The Lamborghini was a brilliant shade of electric blue that seemed to glow even under the dim parking lot lights. Its sleek lines and aggressive stance spoke of speed, power, and most importantly, money lots and lots of money. The kind of money that Nora had never possessed and couldn't even imagine having. The damage to her Honda was minimal, a small dent in the rear bumper that barely qualified as cosmetic. But the Lamborghini's front fascia bore a spiderweb of cracks across what she was certain was custom-painted carbon fiber. Even in her panic, Nora could tell this wasn't the kind of repair that could be handled at the corner auto shop with a bottle of touch-up paint. Her hands shook as she fumbled for her phone, the rain making the screen difficult to read. She considered, for just a moment, simply driving away. The parking lot was empty, the rain provided cover, and who would ever know? But even as the thought crossed her mind, Nora knew she couldn't live with herself if she took the coward's way out. She found a pen in her purse and tore a page from her sketchbook, the same sketchbook that held her dreams of becoming a real artist someday, not just someone who designed corporate logos for companies that sold insurance and lawn care services. Her handwriting was shaky from the cold and adrenaline as she scrawled out a message. "I'm so sorry about your car. I was backing up and didn't see you there. This was entirely my fault, and I take full responsibility. Please call me so we can work this out. Again, I'm truly sorry. It's Nora Hayes. 555-2847. She folded the note and tucked it under the Lamborghini's windshield wiper, the paper immediately beginning to absorb the rain despite her efforts to protect it. Standing there in the downpour, looking at the damage she'd caused to what was undoubtedly someone's prized possession, Nora felt the weight of her circumstances more heavily than ever before. Whoever owned this car lived in a completely different world from hers, a world where a fender bender was an inconvenience rather than a potential financial catastrophe. As she drove home through the empty streets,
Loud.
Nora couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just set in motion. Events that would change her life in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The next morning would bring consequences she wasn't prepared for. And a conversation that would challenge everything she thought she knew about accountability, kindness, and the unexpected ways that honest moments can transform to completely different lives. Asterisk. Nora's phone buzzed at exactly 8:23 a.m., jolting her from the restless sleep she'd finally managed to find around 3 a.m. She'd spent most of the night staring at her cracked ceiling, calculating and recalculating how much a Lamborghini repair might cost, each estimate more terrifying than the last. Her savings account held exactly $247, enough for groceries for 2 weeks if she was careful, but nowhere near enough to fix what she'd broken. The caller ID showed an unknown number with a local area code. This was it. The moment she'd been dreading since she'd left that soggy note under the windshield wiper. Nora sat up in bed, running her fingers through her tangled hair, and answered with the most professional voice she could muster. "Hello, is this Nora Hayes?" The voice was male, deep, and surprisingly calm. She'd expected anger, maybe even shouting. Instead, the tone was almost conversational. "Yes, this is Nora. I assume you're calling about your car. I want you to know that I'm prepared to take full responsibility. Wait, slow down." There was something that sounded almost like amusement in his voice. "First, let me introduce myself. I'm Marcus Sterling. And second, before we talk about responsibility, I have to ask, are you okay? No injuries from the accident?" The question caught her completely off guard. In all her catastrophic imaginings of this conversation, concern for her well-being hadn't featured prominently. Yes, I'm fine. Thank you for asking." "But your car is just a car," Marcus interrupted. "And honestly, I have to say your note was refreshing. Do you know how rare it is for someone to leave their real contact information when they damage someone else's property? Most people would have driven off and hoped for the best." Nora blinked, staring at her reflection in the black screen of her laptop. "I couldn't do that. It wouldn't be right." There was a pause, and when Marcus spoke again, there was something warmer in his voice. "No, it wouldn't be. Which is exactly why I'd like to meet you in person. Not to discuss payments or insurance claims. I can handle all that. I'm curious about the person who has that kind of integrity. You want to meet me?" Nora's voice cracked slightly. "I don't understand. Aren't you angry?" Marcus laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to travel through the phone and somehow ease the knot of anxiety in her chest. "Angry at someone who was honest enough to leave a note and apologetic enough to lose sleep over it? Hardly look. I know. This might sound strange, but would you be willing to meet for coffee this afternoon? There's a place called Grind Coffee House that I've heard good things about." The irony wasn't lost on her. "Actually, I work there, part-time. I could meet you there around 2 p.m. if that works." "Perfect. And Nora, don't spend another minute worrying about the repair costs. That's what insurance is for." After he hung up, Nora sat in her bed for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened. She'd been prepared for legal threats, payment demands, maybe even a lawsuit. Instead, she'd gotten an invitation to coffee from someone who seemed more interested in her character than his damaged property Rita Montenegro had owned. Grind Coffee House for 15 years, and in that time she'd developed an almost supernatural ability to read people. When Nora arrived for her shift that afternoon, clearly nervous and checking her appearance in every reflective surface, Rita knew something was up. "Spill it," Rita said, wiping down the espresso machine with practiced efficiency. "You've got that look like you're about to meet your probation officer." Nora had confided in Rita about the accident during a quiet moment between customers. Now, as 2 p.m. approached, she was second-guessing everything about her appearance. Her best jeans had a small hole near the knee. Her sweater was 3 years old, and her sneakers had seen better decades. "What if he's some kind of eccentric rich guy who likes to mess with people?" Nora asked, adjusting her ponytail for the 5th time. "What if this is all some elaborate setup? Then he picked the wrong girl to mess with," Rita replied firmly. "You've got more backbone than you give yourself credit for. Besides, anyone who calls instead of showing up with lawyers probably isn't looking for trouble." At exactly 2 p.m., the cafe's door chimed, and Nora looked up to see a man scanning the room with intelligent dark eyes. Marcus Sterling was younger than she'd expected, maybe early 30s, with the kind of confident posture that came from success, but without the arrogance she'd anticipated. He wore dark jeans and a simple gray sweater that probably cost more than her monthly grocery budget. But he carried himself with an easy approachability that immediately put her at ease. There, eyes met across the cafe, and he smiled, not the predatory grin of someone planning to take advantage, but something genuine and warm. He approached her table with the slight hesitation of someone who wasn't entirely sure of the social protocol for this situation either. "Nora?" When she nodded, he extended his hand. "Marcus, thank you for agreeing to meet with me." "Thank you for not having me arrested," she replied, then immediately regretted the joke. But Marcus laughed, settling into the chair across from her. "The day is young," he said with mock seriousness, then grinned. "I'm kidding. Really, I just wanted to meet the person who restored a little of my faith in human nature." As Rita brought over Marcus's coffee black, no sugar, Nora found herself studying his face. There were laugh lines around his eyes, but also something that suggested he didn't laugh as often as he should. Success, she realized, didn't necessarily equal happiness. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said, cradling his coffee cup. "What do you do when you're not accidentally backing into expensive cars?" "I'm a graphic designer, freelance mostly. And I work here part-time to help make ends meet." Nora had learned long ago not to oversell her struggling career. "What about you?" "I develop software. Started a company about 8 years ago that got lucky." The way he said "got lucky" suggested there had been significantly more skill and hard work involved than luck. But Nora appreciated his modesty. Their conversation flowed easier than either had expected. Marcus was genuinely curious about her work, asking thoughtful questions about her design process and the challenges of freelancing. When Nora mentioned that she also painted in her spare time, what little she had his interest sharpened. "What kind of painting?" "Nothing fancy, just things I see around the city. People, buildings, moments that catch my eye." She felt heat rising in her cheeks. "It's just a hobby, really." "Do you have any pictures of your work?" Before she could stop herself, Nora was pulling out her phone, scrolling through photos of canvases propped against her apartment walls. Marcus studied each image with an intensity that surprised her, occasionally asking her to go back to a previous painting. "These are remarkable," he said finally. "There's something in the way you capture emotion. It's like you're painting the feeling of a moment, not just what it looks like." No one had ever described her work that way before. Nora felt something shift inside her chest, a tiny bloom of hope that she'd been afraid to acknowledge. "I have a proposition for you," Marcus said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "But first, I need you to know that this has nothing to do with the car. That's a non-issue. This is about your talent." Nora waited, hardly daring to breathe. "Opening a new office building downtown next month. The lobby needs artwork, something original, something that speaks to people. Would you be interested in creating a mural for the space?" The words seemed to hang in the air between them. Nora stared at Marcus, waiting for the punchline or the catch. When neither came, she felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "Serious, dead serious. And I pay fair market rates for quality work." For the first time in months, Nora Hayes allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, her luck was finally changing. 3 weeks after that life-changing coffee meeting, Nora stood in the lobby of Sterling Tech's new downtown headquarters, her neck craned back to take in the massive blank wall that would soon showcase her work. The space was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows flooded the area with natural light, and the modern architecture created clean lines that would complement her artistic vision perfectly. Intimidating, isn't it? Marcus appeared beside her, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the cafe across the street. He'd made it a habit to check on her progress, though Nora suspected his frequent visits had more to do with their growing friendship than professional oversight. Terrifying, she admitted, accepting the coffee gratefully. "I keep expecting to wake up and find out this was all some elaborate dream." The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of preparation. Marcus had given her complete creative freedom, asking only that the mural reflect the innovative spirit of his company. While remaining accessible to the diverse group of people who would pass through the lobby daily, Nora had spent countless hours sketching, researching, and developing a concept that would honor both the building's modern aesthetic and her own artistic style. Her design featured an abstract representation of human connection in the digital age, flowing lines that suggested both circuit boards and organic growth, punctuated by bursts of color that represented moments of creativity and breakthrough. It was ambitious, requiring techniques she'd never attempted on such a large scale. But something about the project had awakened a confidence in her that she hadn't known existed. "I have some news that might interest you," Marcus said, pulling out his phone. "Remember that photo I took of your preliminary sketches last week?" Nora nodded. He'd asked permission to document her process, claiming it was for the company's social media, though she'd noticed he seemed more interested in her artistic journey than any corporate promotion. "Well, I may have shared it with a friend of mine. Vincent Cross, he writes for Art Scene magazine. He'd like to interview you about the project." The coffee cup nearly slipped from Nora's hands. Vincent Cross was a legendary figure in the local art world, known for his sharp critiques and his ability to make or break emerging artists with a single review. She'd read his column religiously for years, never imagining she'd one day be worthy of his attention. "Marcus, you can't just... what if he hates it? What if I'm not ready for that kind of exposure? What if he loves it?" Marcus countered gently. "Nora, you have to stop underestimating yourself. I've watched you work for 3 weeks now, and I've never seen anyone more dedicated to their craft. You belong in galleries, not just corporate lobbies." Before Nora could respond, the lobby's glass doors opened, and a woman in her 50s strode in, her silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon, and her eyes scanning the space with professional assessment. She wore a charcoal wool coat that spoke of expensive taste and the kind of confidence that came from years of success. "That must be Jamie," Marcus said, waving the woman over. "My assistant arranged for her to stop by." But as the woman approached, Nora realized this wasn't Jamie Chen, Marcus's efficient assistant whom she'd met several times. This woman carried herself with the authority of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. "Diana Walsh," the woman introduced herself, extending a manicured hand to Nora. "I own the Walsh Gallery uptown." Marcus thought, "I should see your work in progress." Nora's mouth went dry. The Walsh Gallery was one of the most prestigious art venues in the city, known for launching the careers of artists who went on to achieve national recognition. Diana Walsh was a kingmaker in the local art scene, and her approval could open doors that Nora had never dared to imagine walking through. "It's an honor to meet you, Ms. Walsh. Though I should mention that the mural is still in very early stages, please. Call me Diana, and Marcus has shown me your preliminary work. I'm impressed by your vision." Diana's sharp eyes took in every detail of the wall space. Scale is ambitious for someone without formal gallery experience, but ambition often separates good artists from great ones. Over the next hour, Diana asked probing questions about Nora's artistic background, her influences, and her long-term goals. It's unlike the casual conversations she'd grown comfortable having with Marcus. This felt like an examination, one that could determine the trajectory of her entire career. "I'd like to propose something," Diana said finally. "Assuming this mural lives up to the promise I see in your sketches, I'd be interested in featuring your work in a group exhibition this spring. Emerging Voices, it's a show I curate annually. To introduce promising new talent to serious collectors." Nora felt the world tilt slightly. A gallery exhibition. Her work hanging on white walls under professional lighting with printed descriptions and price tags. People she'd never met discussing her artistic choices, perhaps even purchasing pieces to hang in their homes. That would be incredible," she managed to say. "But I should mention that most of my current portfolio consists of smaller canvases. I'm not sure I have enough work for a gallery showing. That's what the next few months are for." Diana replied with a smile that suggested she was accustomed to turning potential into profit. "I don't expect overnight transformation, but I do expect dedication. You prepared to treat your art as more than a hobby?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Nora thought about her cramped apartment, her part-time job at the cafe, the constant financial stress that had defined her adult life. Then she looked at the blank wall that would soon showcase her vision to hundreds of people daily, at Marcus, who had believed in her talent enough to take a chance, and at Diana, who was offering her a path toward the kind of artistic career she'd only dreamed about. "Yes," she said, surprised by the strength in her own voice. "I'm ready to take it seriously." Marcus had been unusually quiet during the exchange, but now he stepped forward with something that looked like pride in his expression. "There's one more thing, Nora. I've been thinking about what you said about needing more time to focus on your art." He pulled out a manila envelope and handed it to her. Inside was a contract not for the mural, which they'd already agreed upon, but for something else entirely. "Sterling Tech is launching a creative initiative," Marcus explained. "We want to commission original artwork for all our office spaces, not just this building. I'd like you to be our artist in residence, a one-year position that would give you a steady income while allowing you to focus on developing your portfolio." Nora stared at the contract, the numbers swimming before her eyes. The salary was more than she'd made in her best year of freelancing combined. It represented security, creative freedom, and most importantly, the chance to prove that her talent was worth investing in. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say yes," Diana interjected with dry humor. "Good opportunities don't come along often in this business. When they do, smart artists grab them with both hands." As Nora looked around the lobby at the wall that would soon display her largest work to date, at the two people who had appeared in her life like guardian angels in expensive clothing, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Real, tangible hope for a future that looked nothing like the struggling, exhausted existence she'd been living. "Yes," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Yes to all of it." The next phase of her life was about to begin, though she had no idea that her growing success would bring challenges she wasn't prepared for and test the foundations of the most important relationship she'd ever built. 2 months later, Nora's life had transformed beyond recognition. The mural at Sterling Tech had been completed to widespread acclaim, with photos circulating on social media and drawing visitors who came specifically to see her work. The Walsh Gallery exhibition was just 3 weeks away, and Nora had been working 18-hour days to complete the 12 paintings Dana had requested for the show. Her cramped studio apartment had been replaced by a spacious loft in the Arts District, complete with floor-to-ceiling windows and enough wall space to display her work properly. The constant financial anxiety that had defined her 20s was gone, replaced by the surreal experience of having more money in her checking account than she'd ever imagined possible. But success, Nora was learning, came with complications she hadn't anticipated. "The Chronicle wants to do a feature story," Jamie Chen announced, scrolling through emails on her tablet as she sat in Nora's new studio. Marcus had assigned his assistant to help manage Nora's sudden influx of media requests and commission inquiries. "And there are 3 more gallery owners who want to meet with you before the Walsh opening." Nora stood before her latest canvas, brush suspended in midair, trying to focus on the delicate color transition she'd been working on for the past hour. But concentration had become increasingly difficult as her world expanded in directions she'd never prepared for. "Can we schedule them for next week?" Nora asked, not turning from her painting. "I need to finish this piece before Nora." Marcus's voice from the studio entrance made her turn. He stood in the doorway holding a newspaper, his expression unreadable. "We need to talk." Jamie immediately gathered her things and excused herself, leaving Nora and Marcus alone in the spacious studio. The afternoon light streaming through the windows should have been perfect for painting, but suddenly the space felt charged with tension. "What's wrong?" Nora set down her brush, wiping her hands on the paint-stained apron she'd taken to wearing constantly. Marcus held up the newspaper. The arts and culture section of the city's alternative weekly. The headline made Nora's stomach drop. "From Bender to Fortune. Local artist fairy tale rise raises questions." "Vincent Cross," Marcus said grimly. "Apparently our friend decided to dig a little deeper into your story." Nora sank onto the paint-splattered stool she used while working on detail work. She'd been so focused on creating art that she'd barely considered how her rapid ascent might look to outside observers. Vincent's article, while not entirely negative, raised pointed questions about nepotism, about whether her success was based on talent or circumstances, about the ethics of a wealthy tech executive discovering an unknown artist after a convenient accident. "He's not entirely wrong," Nora said quietly. "I mean, if you hadn't responded the way you did to the accident, stop." Marcus crossed the studio in 3 quick strides, his intensity surprising her. "Don't let anyone, including Vincent Cross, diminish what you've accomplished. I've seen your work ethic. I've watched you push yourself to exhaustion to meet every deadline, to exceed every expectation. Your talent is real, Nora. The circumstances that brought us together don't change that." But even as he spoke, Nora could see the doubt creeping into his own expression. The article had quoted several anonymous sources in the local art scene, suggesting that Nora's rapid rise was suspicious. That real artists spent decades developing their skills and building reputations through slow, methodical progress. "Maybe they're right," she said, looking around the studio that had begun to feel more like a museum than a workspace. "Right. Maybe I'm moving too fast. Maybe I should withdraw from the Walsh exhibition until what? Until you've suffered enough to satisfy other people's expectations." Marcus ran his hands through his hair, a gesture she'd learned meant he was fighting to control his temper. "Do you know how many artists would kill for the opportunities you're getting, and you want to walk away because some people are jealous?" Their first real argument erupted from there. Voices raised in a way that would have been impossible in the quiet intimacy of their early coffee meetings. Marcus accused her of losing confidence in her own abilities. Ow. Nora accused him of not understanding the pressure she was under, the constant scrutiny that came with being seen as his protege, rather than an artist in her own right. The fight ended with Marcus storming out, leaving Nora alone in her beautiful studio, surrounded by paintings that suddenly felt like evidence of her own inadequacy. That evening, as Nora sat in her loft trying to process the day's events, her phone rang. The caller ID showed a name she hadn't seen in over a year: Tom Bradley, her ex-boyfriend who had broken up with her 18 months earlier, claiming he needed to focus on his own career and couldn't handle dating someone who was going nowhere. Professionally, "I saw the article," Tom said without preamble when she answered, "and I have to say, I'm impressed. You really landed on your feet. What do you want, Tom? Can't an old friend call to congratulate you on your success?" His tone was casual, but Nora detected the calculating undertone she'd somehow missed during their 2-year relationship. "I was thinking we should get together, catch up. I've been working on some projects that might interest you now that you're connected." The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, with Tom dropping hints about business opportunities and collaborative projects that would benefit from her new connections. By the time she hung up, Nora felt nauseated. Tom's sudden renewed interest in her had nothing to do with her as a person, and everything to do with her newfound access to Marcus's world. Diana Walsh called an hour later with news that should have been exciting. A major collector had seen photos of Nora's exhibition pieces and wanted to commission a large-scale work for his private collection. The fee being offered was more than Nora had made in her entire previous career combined. "This is incredible news," Diana said, though her tone suggested she was delivering information rather than celebrating. "Though I should mention that there's been some chatter in the community about your rapid ascent. Nothing you need to worry about, but you should be prepared for some pointed questions at the opening." After Diana hung up, Nora found herself standing in front of the bathroom mirror, studying her reflection. The woman looking back at her was better dressed, better rested, and more financially secure than she'd ever been. But there was something in her eyes of wariness that hadn't been there 3 months ago. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "I'm sorry about earlier. Can we talk?" Nora stared at the message for a long time before responding, "I need some space to think." It was the first time since their coffee meeting that she'd pushed him away, and the silence that followed felt like the end of something important. Outside her loft windows, the city sparkled with possibilities and dangers in equal measure, and for the first time since the accident, Nora wondered if the collision that had changed her life had been a blessing or a curse in disguise. The opening at the Walsh Gallery was approaching fast, and with it, the moment when she would discover whether her talent was strong enough to survive the scrutiny of a world that seemed determined to find her unworthy of the opportunities she'd been given. Success, she was learning, was far more complicated than failure had ever been. Asterisk, the night of the Walsh Gallery. Opening arrived with an unseasonable warmth that drew crowds onto the streets of the Arts District. Nora stood in front of her bathroom mirror, adjusting the simple black dress she'd chosen for the evening, elegant but not ostentatious, confident but not arrogant. After weeks of scrutiny and self-doubt, she'd made a decision that surprised even herself. She was going to trust her talent. The gallery buzzed with the kind of energy that accompanied important cultural events. Nora's 12 paintings hung on, pristine white walls under carefully positioned spotlights, each piece representing months of work and years of dreams finally given form. Diana Walsh moved through the crowd with practiced grace, introducing collectors to emerging artists and facilitating the delicate dance of art commerce. Nora Hayes, a woman with silver hair and intelligent eyes, approached, extending her hand. "I'm Elena Rodriguez. I write for the National Arts Quarterly." Nora recognized the name immediately. Elena Rodriguez was known for her thoughtful and depth profiles of artists whose work transcended local recognition to achieve national significance. Her approval could launch careers. Her criticism could end them. "I've been following your story with great interest," Elena continued. "The circumstances of your discovery are certainly unusual, but I'm more curious about what drives your artistic vision. Tell me about this piece." She gestured to Nora's favorite painting in the collection. Complex composition that captured the moment when urban isolation transforms into human connection. It was based on a scene she'd witnessed from her old apartment window. Strangers helping each other during a sudden rainstorm. Their individual struggles temporarily forgotten in shared purpose. As Nora explained her process and inspiration, she felt the familiar confidence that came from discussing work she truly believed in. Elena's questions were probing but fair, and gradually Nora realized she was enjoying the conversation rather than enduring it. "I have to ask about the elephant in the room," Elena said eventually. "It's been speculation about whether your success is based on talent or circumstances. How do you respond to those who suggest you've received opportunities other artists haven't had access to?" Nora had prepared for this question, but her answer came from a place of hard-won clarity rather than defensive scripting. "I think privilege and talent aren't mutually exclusive. I met Marcus under unusual circumstances, and yes, that meeting opened doors for me. But those doors only stayed open because of the work I put behind them. I've painted every single day for months. I've studied, practiced, and pushed myself beyond what I thought was possible. The opportunity was a gift, but what I did with it was earned." Elena nodded approvingly. "And where do you see your relationship with Marcus Sterling fitting into your artistic journey?" Before Nora could answer, she spotted Marcus across the gallery. He stood near the entrance, clearly having just arrived, scanning the crowd until his eyes found hers. He hadn't spoken since their argument 3 days earlier, and seeing him now sent a complicated mix of emotions through her chest. "Marcus Sterling believed in my work when I didn't believe in it myself," Nora said, her voice carrying across the space between them. "But more than that, he taught me that integrity and kindness don't have to be weaknesses in a world that often rewards neither. Our relationship, whatever form it takes, is built on mutual respect and shared values." Marcus began moving through the crowd toward them, and Nora excused herself from Elena to meet him halfway. The gallery continued to buzz around them, but for a moment, it felt like they were back in that coffee shop where everything had started. "Your paintings are incredible," Marcus said quietly. "I mean, I knew they would be, but seeing them displayed like this, ... Nora, you belong here. You've always belonged here." "I'm sorry about the other day," she began, but he shook his head. "You were right to push back. I was so focused on defending your success that I wasn't hearing your concerns about how fast everything was moving." He glanced around the gallery, taking in the crowd of collectors, critics, and art enthusiasts who had come to see her work. But looking at this, at what you've created, I don't think the timeline matters. Great art happens when it happens. David Kim, a prominent collector known for his discerning taste and substantial purchases, approached with Diana Walsh at his side. Ms. Hayes, I wanted to personally congratulate you on this exhibition. Your work has a rare quality. It's both intellectually sophisticated and emotionally accessible. I'd like to discuss commissioning a piece for my foundation's permanent collection. As David described his vision for a large-scale work that would hang in the lobby of a new children's hospital, Nora felt something click into place. This was why she'd become an artist, not for the money or recognition, but for the possibility that her work might bring comfort or joy to people she'd never meet. The evening continued with a stream of conversations, introductions, and quiet moments of validation. Several paintings sold to collectors who spoke passionately about why the work had moved them. Vincent Cross appeared late in the evening, offering a grudging but genuine apology for the tone of his earlier article and asking for an interview about her artistic process rather than her personal story. As the crowd began to thin, Elena Rodriguez approached Nora one final time. I'd like to write a feature about your work for our next issue, not about the accident or the controversy, but about what I see in these paintings is a mature, artistic voice that deserves national attention. After Elena left, Nora found herself alone with Marcus and Diana in the nearly empty gallery. Red dots appeared next to 9 of her 12 paintings, indicating sales that would provide financial security for the next year while she continued developing her artistic practice. So what's next? Diana asked, already thinking ahead to future exhibitions and opportunities. Nora looked around the gallery one more time, taking in the sight of her work professionally displayed and appreciated by people who understood art as more than decoration. 6 months ago, she'd been backing into Marcus's Lamborghini in a poorly lit parking lot, exhausted and struggling to make ends meet. Tonight, she was an artist with gallery representation, critical recognition, and most importantly, the confidence to trust her own vision. Next, I paint, she said simply. I keep working, keep growing, keep pushing myself to create work that matters. The rest will follow. Marcus smiled, the expression carrying echoes of that first coffee meeting when he'd recognized something in her she hadn't yet seen in herself. For what it's worth, I think you're just getting started. As they walked out of the gallery together into the warm night air, Nora reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. The accident that had seemed like a disaster had become the foundation for a life she couldn't have imagined. But more than the external changes, the money, the recognition, the opportunities, what mattered most was the internal transformation. She'd learned to see herself as Marcus had seen her from the beginning, as someone whose talent and integrity were worth believing in. The Lamborghini was long since repaired and forgotten. But the connection forged in that rainy parking lot had grown into something neither of them had expected. Not just a romance, though that was part of it, but a partnership built on mutual respect, shared values, and the understanding that sometimes the best things in life come from embracing the unexpected. As they walked down the street together, Nora couldn't help but smile at the thought that she'd spent months worried about the ethics of her rapid success, when the real miracle wasn't the speed of her rise, but the fact that someone had seen her potential and been willing to invest in it, in a world that often rewarded shortcuts and connections over substance. Marcus had chosen to support her not because of who she knew, but because of who she was. The story that had begun with a collision would continue with creation, and for the first time in her life, Nora Hayes was exactly where she was meant to be. Asterisk.